Robb Stark stood over the war table in Riverrun, the flickering candlelight dancing across his furrowed brow. Every move he made since his father's death had been calculated, deliberate, but never without heart. Yet this time, heart wouldn't win the war. The Lannisters were too strong, too cunning. He needed something bold, something no one would expect. That's when Roose Bolton, always too quiet, leaned forward with a plan. "They'll never suspect peace," Rose had said, his voice like chilled steel. "If we offer an olive branch, Walder Frey may drop his guard. You could use the wedding as a trap, reverse the board." Robb didn't trust Bolton completely, but the idea burned itself into his mind. The Freys had been scorned, yes, but they were still opportunists. A grand gesture, marrying his uncle Edmure to a Frey girl, could restore the alliance. Then, during the wedding, Robb's hidden soldiers would strike from the inside, kill Frey, seize the twins, control the crossing, cut off Lannister support from the west. It would be bloody, yes, but decisive, Catelyn objected, of course. A wedding built on lies and knives, that's not who we are, Robb. But it was who they had to become. So the plan began. Robb's most loyal soldiers were chosen for the operation, men who could blend in among the guests, pretend to drink and laugh while secretly armed. Urya, whom they had recently found by chance near Harrenhal, was hidden with a scouting party near the banks of the Green Fork, ready to act if things turned sour. She didn't know the whole plan, just enough to trust that her family had one. Robb himself rehearsed every detail. The fake smiles, the toasts, even the moment he would give the signal. His cup dropped, a code passed to those in place, a dagger in one hand, loyalty in the other. And then came the night. The great hall was thick with song and sweat, meat and mead. Walder Frey's daughters were paraded like livestock. Edmure tried to play the happy groom, but everyone could see his dread. Still the Starks drank. The Freys drank. And as the bedding ceremony commenced, Robb gave the nod to Roose Bolton, stationed closest to Walder, under the guise of an honored guest. That was when everything began to unravel. Roose didn't nod back. Instead, his eyes flicked toward the musicians. The doors closed, locks clicked, crossbows lifted. Robb realized the betrayal a heartbeat too late. The massacre began not with his signal, but theirs. Bolton stabbed a Stark guard in the neck before turning to Catelyn. Blood sprayed across the wedding feast, painting banners red before any vows could even settle. Robb shouted for Arya, for his men outside, but the music drowned him out. Inside it was chaos, his loyal soldiers cut down one by one, their secret blades never drawn in time. Arya, hearing the screams from the woods, charged toward the keep, but the Frey guards overwhelmed her party. She fought like a direwolf, but she was still just a girl with a blade too small for war. Catelyn grabbed a knife and screamed threats at Walder Frey, slicing the throat of a hapless Frey girl in a final act of defiance, hoping it would save her son. But nothing could. Robb's last sight before the blade pierced his heart wasn't the face of an enemy, but Roose Bolton's grim whisper, "The North remembers, but not always wisely." And just like that, the Red Wedding wasn't just a betrayal, it was a failed operation, a trap laid by the Starks, turned against them. An idea that could have won the war, twisted into the dagger that ended it. Arya's heart pounded against her ribs like a war drum as the echo of screams clawed their way out of the hall and into the night. She didn't need to see what was happening to know it had all gone terribly wrong. The plan, Robb's daring strike during the wedding, had been poisoned from within. They had been outplayed. She lunged forward, ducking behind tree trunks and stone, moving like a shadow across the grounds. Her eyes burned with fury and fear. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, was howling wildly from his cage, pulling against his restraints with such rage. The iron bars groaned under the pressure. Arya moved to set him free, but two Frey men were already there, crossbows aimed. She didn't think. She threw the blade she carried, needle-thin, but deadly, and struck one in the throat. The other turned and fired, missing her by inches before Grey Wind exploded from the cage with a roar that shook the courtyard. He tore the man apart, but the noise was enough to alert more guards. Arya ran, disappearing into the darkness, barely missing the arrows now flying in her direction. Behind her, Grey Wind fought like the beast of vengeance he was, but she heard him yelp, once, just once, then silence. That silence made her stomach twist. That silence meant death. Inside, Catelyn was already on her knees, her voice hoarse from screaming, her dress soaked in blood, not her own, not yet. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the dying body of a northern boy she didn't even know by name. She saw Robb, still standing, barely, wounds slicing across his shoulder and side, face twisted in horror. He hadn't cried out. Even as Bolton's blade cut him, he hadn't screamed. He was still fighting. He always had. "Mother," he whispered, blood leaking from his lips. "Tell them. The North lives." But there was no one left to tell. Roose Bolton, calm as winter, stepped forward. "Your son was brave, foolish but brave." Catelyn lunged at him with a scream, but a sword met her halfway. She collapsed beside her son, arms still reaching, as if she could pull him back from death. Outside, Arya watched from a rooftop as the last of Robb's men were slaughtered in the courtyard. She couldn't look away, not even when her brother's banner, the direwolf of House Stark, was ripped from its post and burned. She wanted to run into the fire. She wanted to die with them. But then she remembered something Sandor Clegane once told her: "You can't get revenge if you're dead first." So she ran again. Far from the twins, far from death, but not far enough from the pain. Roose Bolton stood with Walder Frey. Later that night, the blood on his boots drying in flakes, Frey was gloating, chewing on roasted meat like nothing had happened. "You delivered the North," Frey said with a cackle, "and all I had to do was host a wedding." Bolton didn't smile. "We delivered chaos. The North is no gift, it must be earned." Frey didn't care. He had his revenge. He had his name spoken with fear. But Bolton had plans. Bigger ones. He had sent a message already to Tywin Lannister. The lion would smile tonight. The young wolf was dead. But what Bolton didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that death was not the end of House Stark. Arya lived. And so did the fire. In the dungeons below the keep, a single man, Rickard Karstark, was left shackled in a cell. He had been imprisoned by Robb months earlier for treason. Forgotten in the chaos, now left alive by accident. When Arya found him days later, starving and broken, she didn't recognize him at first. But he knew her, even with dirt on her face and blood on her boots. "You're Ned Stark's girl," he rasped. "You saw it? The wedding?" "I saw everything," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Then remember it. All of it. Every name, every face." "I do," Arya replied, her voice a stone. "I will." As the sun rose, she and Karstark slipped away in silence. The Red Wedding was over. The dead were gone, but the vengeance had only just begun. Arya didn't sleep for days after they escaped the twins. Neither did Rickard Karstark. The old man limped through the woods, his chains cut but still clanking with every step. They avoided roads. Smoke still drifted in the air behind them. The final insult to House Stark. Arya didn't cry, not once. Her face had hardened, eyes always scanning, heart thudding with fury. She replayed the massacre in her head constantly. Not just the betrayal, every missed moment, every face she should have killed. Rickard had changed too. His eyes were empty now, not just from betrayal but from guilt. "He should have killed me," he muttered again and again. "I would have died Stark loyal. Now I live a traitor." Arya didn't care. He was alive. That was rare. she needed. Rare things. They travelled north, passing war-torn villages where news of the Red Wedding had already reached. Peasants whispered in corners, farmers placed old Stark banners in the mud, half in mourning, half in defiance. The north might have been broken, but not everyone knelt. Word came slowly but surely. Robb Stark, the king in the north, was dead. His mother, Lady Catelyn, slaughtered. House Stark nearly wiped from the map. The Freys now ruled the twins. Roose Bolton, named Warden of the North. Arya wanted to carve that title into his skin. They reached White Harbour after weeks of hiding. Lord Wyman Manderley welcomed no guests openly, but his daughter Wynella had once been fostered at Winterfell. She saw Arya's face and wept like a mother. They were taken in, hidden beneath the city's great halls like smuggled treasure. "We'll start again," Arya whispered to Karstark one night, pacing. "You're a noble. You still have blood. We find your kin. We find the loyal ones." "You think loyalty survived that slaughter?" Karstark asked bitterly. "You think names and banners mean anything now?" Arya turned to him, eyes blazing. "If they don't, we make them." He stared at her, this child of 10 and 4, with eyes older than his own. "You speak like your father." She didn't smile. "I'm speaking like his ghost." Far to the south, Roose Bolton arrived at Harrenhal. It was to be his seat now, gifted by the Lannisters. The great ruin seemed fitting, a crumbling castle for a crumbling soul. He brought Ramsay with him, now legitimized by royal decree. Bastard no longer. Ramsay, ever cruel, laughed at the irony. "We killed a king, father. Shouldn't we feel more?" Roose simply stared. This wasn't victory, it was necessity. "But it worked. You're Warden of the North. You're untouchable." Roose finally looked at him. "No one is untouchable, especially not when they've spilled king's blood. We've made enemies, deep ones." Ramsay shrugged. "Then let them come." And somewhere in the dark corners of Harrenhal, a raven waited, one of many Arya had loosed. Back in White Harbour, Arya began to build something dangerous. A list. Names. Frey names. Bolton names. Anyone who raised a hand or blade against her family. The names whispered through her sleep. They became prayers, promises. And slowly she turned to the people. Manderley guards, Stark loyalists in hiding, even brigands who once fought for Robb. She didn't promise them riches, just revenge. Rickard helped. He still had a name, a title, even if most thought him disgraced. But that disgrace gave him something Arya couldn't offer, deniability. Together they formed the first tendrils of a resistance. Not large, not loud, but deadly. Arya trained with a spear and dagger. She practiced poisons with an old healer in the docks. She shaved her hair, disguised her voice. And she hunted, quietly, precisely. One Frey merchant died in his sleep. One Bolton soldier was found nailed to a tree. Whispers began, the ghost of the Red Wedding. By the time snow began to fall in the north again, Arya had sent another letter, this one to the Night's Watch. It was addressed to Jon Snow. "Robb is dead. Mother too. I am alive. So is Rickard Karstark. We are building something. The Freys. And think they've won. Roose Bolton wears your father's seat. But they haven't broken us. They only made us quieter. If you're still my brother, meet me at the last hearth. The North remembers." Arya. It was risky. She didn't know if Jon was even alive. But the wall hadn't fallen, and if there was even a sliver of family left, she would find it, because House Stark wasn't dead. It was just buried deep in snow, waiting to rise. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the wall, the cold biting his cheeks more fiercely than usual. He read Arya's letter again, the ink slightly smeared from travel, but the message clear enough to set his soul on fire. Arya was alive, so was Rickard Karstark, and they were fighting. He had spent weeks trying to forget what happened at the Twins! Every raven that came north whispered the same horror. Robb dead, Catelyn dead, betrayed by their own. Even Ghost had howled into the wind when the news came, as if mourning not just their family, but the breaking of something sacred. But this letter changed everything. "Arya's alive," he told Sam, holding the parchment as if it might crumble. In his hands, "She's building something. She wants me to meet her." Sam's eyes widened. "Jon, that's dangerous. The Night's Watch doesn't take sides. You leave now. They'll call it desertion." "I'm not leaving the Watch," Jon said, his voice tight. "I'm answering my sister. She's not starting a war. She's finishing what was stolen from us." He left that night. At the last hearth, home of House Umber, Arya and Karstark arrived weeks before Jon. The Umbers had been split, half loyal to Robb, the other half fearful of the Lannisters. Arya didn't come with banners or soldiers, just names and proof of Frey brutality. She showed them the severed fingers of a Frey guard who had slaughtered Umber men at the Red Wedding. She told them the North would never forget. She didn't. Asked for allegiance. She demanded it. Rickard met with Lord Umber personally, reminding him that the Boltons were no true rulers of the North. "They bathed in our king's blood," Karstark spat. "And you'd kneel to them for what? Protection? Gold. You think Roose Bolton will let you keep your heads once he's finished using you?" The Umbers wavered, but Arya didn't. And when Jon Snow rode into the gates days later, cloaked in black with Ghost by his side, everything changed. He embraced Arya like a man who had come back from the dead. She looked up at him, her face aged by grief, and simply said, "You came." "Of course I did," he replied. "You're my sister." Together, the Stark children and the disgraced Karstark stood before House Umber and declared a rebellion. Not for glory, not even for vengeance, but for the right to be free of traitors. Roose Bolton heard about the gathering at the last hearth within a fortnight. The raven came from a spy within White Harbour. His lips curled in disgust. "Stark. Whelps playing war," he muttered, handing the letter to Ramsay. "It won't last." Ramsay read it and grinned. "Let me take care of it. Give me a few men. I'll make a winter example of them." Rose hesitated. Arya Stark's survival wasn't just a threat. It was a symbol. The people loved the Starks. The North was not truly his, not yet. And if this rebellion spread, even a whisper could turn into a storm. "Take 10 men. No banners, no noise," he said finally. "Kill them in the dark. Don't start a war, yet." Ramsay smiled wider. "I don't need war. Just their screams." At the last hearth, Arya was preparing. She trained with Jon, daily, learned how to move with a sword instead of just a dagger. She wasn't as strong, but she was faster. Her rage made her tireless. Jon watched her with worry, sensing the fire in her was starting to burn too hot. "You're becoming someone else," he warned. "This isn't the Arya I remember." "I'm becoming who I need to be," she replied. "Do you want revenge or not?" "I want justice," Jon said. "Not slaughter." Arya didn't. Answer, she had begun to believe there was no difference. Then the attack came. 10 men in black, cloaked like shadows, struck at night. The Umbers were caught off guard. 3 men dead before the alarm rang. Arya woke to the sound of screaming. She grabbed her blade and rushed into the hall, Jon close behind. Ramsay was among them, a curved blade in hand, dancing through blood, like it was his birthright. Arya found him over the body of Rickard Karstark. The old man was dying, blood pouring from a stomach wound. "You shouldn't have lived," Ramsay hissed. Arya screamed and lunged, but Ramsay caught her blade, slashed her arm and disappeared into the shadows. Jon found her minutes later, holding Karstark's hand as he took his last breath. "They knew," Karstark gasped. "White Harbour. Spy." Arya's face went cold. "I'll kill them all." Jon didn't try to stop her this time, because now it wasn't just rebellion, it was war. They buried Rickard Karstark under a frost-bitten elm outside the last hearth. The snow hadn't stopped in days, as if the skies themselves mourned. Arya stood over his grave, her wounded arm wrapped tight, her face pale but hard. She didn't speak during the burial. She didn't have to. Everyone could feel what she was thinking. Jon watched her from a distance, a hollow forming in his chest. Arya had always been wild, unpredictable, but now she was becoming something else, something colder, something forged in blood. After the failed assassination, the Umbers no longer hesitated. They gave their full allegiance to Arya and Jon, swearing not just fealty, but vengeance. If Rose thinks the North forgot, then he never truly knew it, Lord Umber declared. Arya's response was simpler. We start with the spy. That night, she slipped out of the keep alone into the woods, where the snow muffled every step. She found him near the Manderley camp, one of their traveling scribes, a man who had asked too many questions and carried too many scrolls. She didn't give him a chance to beg. A dagger to the throat, a whispered word, for Robb. When she returned, her clothes were stained, and her hands shook only slightly. Jon confronted her. We needed proof. I don't need proof when I already know, she said. He knew too much. He spoke like he already knew our next steps. You're not a judge, he said, anger flashing. You're not an executioner. Arya stared at him. Aren't you? Jon didn't answer, because deep down, he knew she was right. They were both becoming things they hadn't wanted to be. Roose Bolton's next move was swift and brutal. Ramsay had failed to kill Arya and Jon, but he'd succeeded in something worse, provoking them into open warfare. Roose couldn't afford a full rebellion to spread. He sent ravens to the Lannisters, asking for men. Tywin replied with gold instead, as usual, and told him to handle it himself. So Roose gathered his banners, those still loyal through fear or greed, House Dustin, House Ricewell, even a few Karstark remnants who still resented Robb for executing Lord Rickard. They marched from the Dreadfort with banners raised. Word reached Arya within days. They're coming, Jon said, laying out the Raven's message on the war table. 300 strong, maybe more. We can't hold them at the last hearth, Arya replied. They'll burn it. Then we meet them before they arrive. They had barely 200 fighters, ragged soldiers, former Stark bannermen, a few Manderley men, and Ghost. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up in fury, in memory. Arya gave one speech, short and brutal. They killed our king. They butchered his mother. They burned our future and laughed while we wept. Now they come to finish what they started. But we are still here, and we will show them. Wolves bite back, the North cheered, not because they believed they'd win, but because they believed in vengeance. The battlefield was a frozen pass near Deepwood Motte, narrow, icy, and perfect for guerrilla tactics. Arya had studied it on maps Robb used to use. She knew how to trap. Jon took the front with the Umbers. Arya moved with the smaller bands, circling through the woods, blades and arrows ready. The Boltons came confident, dressed in heavier armor, with more experienced soldiers, but the snow betrayed them. Arya's traps were brutal, pits hidden under false snow, logs rigged to roll and crush. Her soldiers didn't fight like knights. They fought like ghosts. By nightfall, the Bolton army was bleeding from 100 cuts, but they pushed forward. Ramsay was among them again, hacking down Umbers like a mad dog. Jon found him mid-battle. Their swords clashed in a swirl of frost and fury. Ramsay grinned the whole time. You can't win this, he hissed. Your name is dead. Jon didn't answer. He drove his sword through Ramsay's shoulder. But before he could finish the kill, Ramsay threw a handful of dirt into his eyes and fled into the woods. Jon dropped to one knee, breathing hard, his sword red and steaming. Arya found him minutes later. He's running, she said. Let him, Jon said. We've won. But Arya didn't let him go. She followed the trail, silent and deadly, until she found Ramsay slumped under a tree, bleeding but alive. She knelt beside him. "You remember my brother?" she asked. Ramsay chuckled, teeth bloodied. "Which one?" Arya didn't smile. She slid the blade between his ribs. Slow. Precise. "He remembers you." Ramsay Bolton died with a whisper, not a scream. And in the silence that followed, Arya Stark buried another name from her list. The Bolton banners fell, one by one, until only torn cloth fluttered in the icy wind. The snow-covered battlefield at Deepwood Motte was littered with the remnants of betrayal, broken swords, severed limbs, and the smouldering remnants of sigils that had once struck fear into the hearts of men. Arya stood at the edge of the field, watching as Ghost nosed through the bodies, looking for any threat still. Breathing. There were none. Jon approached from behind, his sword heavy at his side. He looked exhausted, blood drying on his face, his armor battered, but his eyes were clear. "It's over," he said. Arya didn't look at him. "No, it's just quieter." They burned the dead. Stark, Umber, Bolton. Every man returned to the snow in flames. There was no time for tombs, no stonemasons left in the north who weren't already digging graves. After the fire they marched, not in triumph but in silence. Word of the battle spread before them like a whisper carried on the wind. Small villages opened their doors. House Mormont sent envoys. Even old House Serwyn raised the wolf banner again. By the time they reached the outskirts of Winterfell, Arya's force had grown, not into an army, but into something more dangerous, a cause. Winterfell, the seat of their ancestors, still stood under the Boltons. Rose had returned after his failed campaign, deeply aware the tide was turning. He'd tried to reinforce the walls, bring in more men, but fear was thick in the air. He knew the North hated him. He knew what was coming. Jon and Arya didn't lay siege, they sent a raven. One sentence, "The North remembers." And with that, the gates opened, not by surrender, but by uprising. Inside, Bolton's own men turned on him, sick of the blood, tired of fear, disgusted by his cold rule. When Arya and Jon entered Winterfell, swords drawn, they found Rose kneeling in the great hall, wounded and betrayed. He didn't plead, he only looked at Arya. "You've become what we feared." Arya stepped forward. "And you became what we'll forget." She slit his throat where he had once stood in Ned Stark's seat. The stone floor drank deep. Afterward, Jon stood before the gathered houses of the North in Winterfell's courtyard. Lords and ladies, soldiers and farmers alike, Arya at his side, her cloak stained, her blade at her hip. "We were never meant to rule by fear," Jon said. "We were meant to protect. What was taken from us we've taken back, not with tyranny, but with sacrifice." "The wolf lives," Arya said, "but it is not tamed." A silence hung, then Lord Manderly stepped forward and knelt, the king in the north. One by one they followed, lords, bannermen, small folk. "The king in the north," Jon turned to Arya. "This was never the plan." She smiled for the first time in weeks. "Plans fail, remember?" He laughed, just once. "We've won, but the scars won't heal easy." "They're not supposed to," she whispered. "They remind us what never to become." Later, alone in the crypts, Arya stood before Ned Stark's tomb. She laid down a blade, not needle, but the dagger that had ended Ramsay, Rose, and so many others. A relic of vengeance. "I did what I had to," she said to the stone. No voice answered, only the cold. But in her heart she didn't need one. She could feel it. Her father would not have approved of her path, but he would have understood it. The North was free again. Not clean, not innocent, but free. And House Stark still stood, not because of honor, but because someone remembered.